The check folder landed right in front of me, even though I hadn't asked for it. The waiter's hand hovered for a second, then his eyes flicked toward my husband's mother. Janice gave a little laugh, thin and sharp, and tapped the black leather with one manicured nail. "Well," she said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "we've got Ellen's inheritance pocket tonight, don't we?" The silver balloons above us shimmered in the restaurant lights. Somewhere near the bar, people were counting down to midnight in advance, practicing, already a little drunk. At our table, champagne flutes crowded the white cloth. 12 glasses, 12 plates, 12 people who had ordered whatever they wanted without checking the prices once. Mark didn't look at me. He just leaned back, arm over his chair. As if this had been settled long before I arrived, his sister lifted her glass and smirked. "You're a lucky woman, Ellen. Not everyone gets a windfall like that." My fingers rested on my own, smaller plate. One entree, one drink. That was it. I felt my throat go dry. The word inheritance sat heavy in the air, heavier than the smell of steak and garlic butter. No one asked if I was okay with covering the bill. They just watched me, waiting for me to reach for the folder, as if my mother's death had turned me into their walking bank account. I didn't touch it. I reached for my purse instead. Carla's chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the room, sharp enough that a few people turned their heads. She tilted toward me, eyes bright in the way people get when they think they've cornered someone. "So, you're covering, right? Mark said you didn't mind, especially after everything you came into." Mark finally looked at me, but not in a way that felt like support. His expression was flat, almost bored, like he was waiting for a clerk to finish scanning groceries. "It's New Year's, Ellen," he muttered. "Don't make this weird." The waiter lingered near the edge of our table, holding his little tablet. He wasn't looking at me directly, but he wasn't stepping away either. It was as if he'd been instructed to wait for a nod. Janice lifted her glass and clinked the rim with her fork. "She's always been sensitive," she announced. "But truly, honey, this is nothing for you now. You are blessed. You can share a little blessing." Blessed. That word hit harder than the tap of her fork. I pressed a folded napkin into the palm of my hand, grounding myself. The threads felt stiff, almost scratchy. My mother's face flashed through my mind. Not the inheritance, not the money, just her. The way she held my hand in the hospital, the way I couldn't save her. And here they were, toasting with her memory as the currency. I opened my purse, pulled out my own card, set it beside my plate. Only mine. The waiter stepped closer when he saw the single card on the table. "That'll be just for you, ma'am?" he asked softly. Before I could answer, Mark let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "She's joking," he said. "Just run the whole table. She's covering it." The waiter froze. His eyes darted to me, then back to Mark. "I just want to be sure," he said. "It's a large bill." Janice waved her hand in a slow circle. "Oh, she's sure. She knows her role tonight. Don't worry about asking." Her words landed like a damp cloth over the table. My role. I slid the card closer to the waiter. "This is my meal," I said. "Only that, nothing more." The waiter nodded once, then stepped away. The silence that filled the space he left behind wasn't quiet. It pulsed. Carla's fork hit her plate. Walter cleared his throat. Someone at a nearby table laughed, and the sound felt like it came from far away. Mark leaned toward me, jaw tight. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Don't start something." I looked at him, really looked, at the man who had spent weeks hinting, pushing, nudging me towards spending money that didn't come from luck, but from loss, at the man who had let his family assume I was their celebration sponsor. I pushed my chair back. The legs slid across the tile, steady and deliberate. Nobody stopped me. They just watched, waiting for me to cave, waiting for the good daughter-in-law, the grateful wife, the quiet woman who paid. I stood. A chair bumped into my hip as I stepped back, but I didn't apologize. Janice's hand shot out, fingers curled around the stem of her glass. "Ellen," she said, her voice dropping into something sharper. "Don't be dramatic. Sit down and handle the bill like an adult." Carla snorted. "She's really doing this? Over one dinner?" Mark pushed his chair back with a hard scrape. "Ellen, stop. You're embarrassing me." The room didn't fall silent, but the energy around our table shifted. A couple at the next booth paused mid-conversation. Even the waiter across the aisle glanced over as he printed receipts. My coat hung on the back of my chair. I reached for it with steady hands. Not shaking, not rushing, just moving. Janice's eyes widened. She hadn't expected calm. She'd expected tears or guilt or a soft apology. Mark stood up halfway. "You're not walking out." I slipped my arms into the sleeves. The lining brushed against my skin, warm from the restaurant heat. I could feel 12 stares pressing into my back. "You can't leave," Carla added. "We haven't even ordered dessert." I picked up my bag. Not one of them stood fully. Not one of them moved to the side to let me pass. It didn't matter. I stepped around them. No scene, no words. Just the sound of my heels tapping against the tile, steady as a metronome cutting through their disbelief. Behind me, Mark's voice rose. "Ellen, you walk out that door and you're making a statement you can't undo." I didn't turn. The doorway ahead was a rectangle of cold winter air and freedom. I walked toward it. The blast of winter air hit my face the moment I stepped outside. The street was crowded with people in glitter hats and sequined jackets, all buzzing with excitement for the countdown. Their joy felt miles away from the heat burning in my chest. Behind me, the restaurant door swung open. Mark's voice cut through the night. "Ellen, get back here!" His footsteps pounded down the short ramp. Someone from inside shouted my name, Janice, maybe Carla, each voice stacking on top of the last like a messy chorus. I didn't turn around. I crossed the small stretch of sidewalk and unlocked my car with a soft chirp that felt absurdly calm in the chaos. "Don't you dare get in that car," Mark barked. He grabbed the edge of the door before I could close it. His breath clouded the air between us, sharp with the bitterness of champagne. "You're making a scene." I looked at him, not with anger, just with the kind of clarity that comes when everything else has dropped away. "You made the scene," I said quietly. "I just left it." For a moment he froze. Then Janice's voice rang from the entrance. "Mark, let her throw her little fit. She'll get over it." Something shifted in his face. Embarrassment, frustration, something sour. He released the door. I closed it gently, not slamming, not shaking. The interior light faded as the door sealed shut, leaving me in a cocoon of dimness and engine hum. His family stood in a messy line outside the restaurant, still calling my name, still demanding something from me. I put the car in gear, pulled away from the curb. The headlights washed over them for a brief second, then the road swallowed the noise behind me. By the time I reached the first red light, the shouting was gone. Only the quiet remained. The house was dark when I walked in. No lamp left on, no warmth waiting, just the stillness that follows when a place has watched too many arguments. I set my keys on the entry table. The sound echoed more than it should have. For a moment I stood there, coat still on, letting the quiet settle around me. Midnight fireworks boomed somewhere in the distance, muffled through the walls. The neighborhood was celebrating a new year. I was replaying the last hour like a bad loop I couldn't shut off. I walked to the kitchen and filled a glass with water. The running faucet felt loud in a house that had learned to hold its breath. I leaned against the counter and let the cold rim rest against my lip. If my mother could see any of this, she wouldn't care about the money. She never did. She would look at the way they talked to me, at the way Mark stood by, at the way I was expected to be grateful for their disrespect. My phone buzzed on the table. Then again. A stream of notifications. Mark, his mother, his sister, all of them stacking up like they were trying to drag me back through the door. I flipped the phone face down. The screen lit up anyway, glowing through the glass. My shoulders lowered as I exhaled slowly. Not relief, not fear, just the weight of understanding that something had shifted tonight, and no amount of shouting from them would put it back the way it was. I left the glass on the counter and walked upstairs. The house stayed silent, as if waiting for whatever came next. I sat on the edge of the bed, coat still draped over my shoulders. The room felt colder than it should have, like the air had thinned while I was gone. I slipped the coat off and let it fall beside me in a quiet heap. Another buzz came from downstairs, then another. Then a long pause, as if they were regrouping. The clock on the dresser read 2:47 a.m. I didn't expect Mark back soon. Not after the way he had yelled across the parking lot. Not after the way his mother had whispered something to him before I pulled away, her words forming a shape I didn't need to hear to understand. I pulled my hair back, tying it with a band from my wrist. A small motion, but it steadied me. I needed small motions tonight. The big ones had already happened. My mind drifted, uninvited, to a memory I thought I had buried. A different dinner, different table. The night my mother told me she had declined an expensive treatment because she didn't want to be a burden. I remembered gripping her hand and telling her she wasn't one. I remembered wishing she would let someone help. I remembered promising myself I would never let anyone treat me like I owed them pieces of myself I didn't choose to give. And tonight, Mark's family had used her death as an open wallet. They had turned grief into currency. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. The room stayed still. No footsteps downstairs, no door opening, just the faint hum of the heater and the distant crackle of leftover fireworks outside. I wasn't crying. The ache sat deeper than that, more rooted, more old. When the front door finally opened at 3:04 a.m., I didn't flinch. I didn't straighten up. I just waited for the inevitable sound of Mark's steps on the stairs. It didn't take long. Heavy, irritated. Each one hitting the wood like he expected the house to agree with him. The bedroom door swung open without a knock. The hall light spilled in, cutting through the dark. He stood there, coat half off his shoulder, eyes sharp with anger he hadn't bothered to cool. "Are you proud of yourself?" he said. I didn't answer. Not yet. He stepped farther into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. The click of the latch sounded sharper than his voice. He tossed his coat onto the chair, the fabric slapping against the wood. "You humiliated me," he said. "My whole family. Do you have any idea how you looked storming out like that?" I lifted my gaze. "I didn't storm," I said softly. "I left." He scoffed, pacing once across the room, hands clenched at his sides. "You left me there to deal with them, with the bill, with the questions. You walked out like a child throwing a tantrum." My fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "You expected me to pay for everyone without asking." He stopped. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say out loud. "They relied on you," he said. "You know the situation. You know they can't afford a dinner like that. It wouldn't have hurt you." I pressed my lips together. "It wasn't about the money." He threw his hands up. "Oh, please! Everything is about the money now. Ever since you got that inheritance, you've acted like—" I cut him off before he could twist the sentence into something uglier. "You used my mother's death as a punchline tonight." His face tightened. "That's not what happened." "Your mother said inheritance pocket. Your sister joked about being lucky I came into it. You sat there and let them treat it like a community fund." He looked away for a moment, then turned back with something colder in his voice. "They think you're punishing them for not helping your mom. Why don't you just admit it?" The words didn't shout. They landed, heavy, deliberate, cruel in the way only someone who knows your deepest wound can be. My breath left me in one slow exhale. "I will never use her suffering to get back at anyone," I said, "but you used her memory to excuse your family's entitlement. That's what happened tonight." He stepped closer. Too close. "You could have just paid. That's all they expected. And that," I said quietly, "is the problem." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him, like I had broken an unspoken rule, like I had dared to redraw a line he thought would always stay where he placed it. He opened his mouth as if to argue again, then shut it. Not because he understood, because he didn't know what to say that wouldn't prove my point further. The room stayed still between us. He turned away first, not to cool down, to regroup, to rebuild whatever argument he thought might corner me next. His hands pressed flat against the dresser, shoulders tense beneath his wrinkled shirt. For a moment he stared at the wood grain like it could give him the right words. Then he straightened, exhaling sharply through his nose. "You know what you did," he said. "You made a spectacle. You humiliated me in front of my family on New Year's Eve." I stayed seated, still. The steadiness seemed to irritate him more than if I'd yelled back. "They were counting on you," he repeated, as if saying it twice would make it sound reasonable. "They should never have counted on me," I replied. My voice stayed even, not calm, controlled. There's a difference. He spun around, pointing toward the doorway like he could gesture the night back into a different shape. "You just walked out, no explanation. You didn't care how it made me look." "I cared how they treated me," I said. "For weeks, you've hinted that I should spend the money on things you wanted. You've pushed. You've assumed. Tonight was the moment you stopped hinting and started expecting. That's not fair," he said. But the way his eyes dropped told me it was. And he knew it. The heater clicked on, filling the silence with a low hum. Outside, another burst of fireworks faded into the cold. Inside, something else was cracking. The illusion that this was a one-time misunderstanding. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he tried again. A smaller voice, tired, thin around the edges. "It was already big," I said. "You just didn't see it until I stood up." He sank onto the foot of the bed, rubbing his forehead like the night had been something done to him, like he hadn't been part of it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't peace, it was distance, new but permanent, enough to feel like furniture. When he finally looked at me, there was no apology, just confusion that the woman he married had drawn a line he never imagined she would. "What happens now?" he asked. The first honest question of the night. I didn't answer right away. Some truths need space before they land, but I knew he heard the shape of it anyway. In the silence, in the shift, in the edge he hadn't noticed before tonight. I stood from the bed, the floor cool beneath my feet as I crossed to the window. The blinds were half open, letting in a faint stripe of moonlight across the carpet. Outside, the last stragglers of the celebration were drifting home, their laughter fading into the late hour. Behind me, Mark shifted. Not toward me, just restlessly, like a man waiting for a verdict he didn't think he should receive. "You know I didn't mean anything by it," he said. The words were softer, but not sincere. More like a man trying out different tones until one sticks. I rested my hand on the window frame. "You didn't need to mean it," I said. "You let it happen. You encouraged it. You watched your family put a price tag on my grief." He let out a frustrated sound. "You're twisting this." I turned, finally facing him. "No, I'm naming it." His mouth opened, then closed. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, recognition, the kind people get when they realize the person they've underestimated is no longer playing along. "You're acting like I don't do anything for you," he muttered, as if one dinner, erases everything. "It wasn't one dinner," I said. "It was the expectation, the entitlement. The way you let them talk about the money like it wasn't tied to the hardest months of my life." He looked away again. The dresser. The floor. Anywhere except at me. "Mom didn't mean anything by the joke," he said weakly. "It wasn't just a joke," I replied. "It was a pattern, and you didn't stop it because you benefited from it." He flinched. A small, involuntary movement. The room felt different now. Not charged, not loud, just honest in a way it hadn't been in years. I sat back down on my side of the bed, leaving space between us that neither of us tried to close. His shoulders seemed to slump under the weight of something he didn't want to name. "Are you leaving me?" he asked suddenly. The question wasn't tender. It was fearful in a practical way, like a man worried about the fallout, the optics, the reshuffling of a life he assumed would remain convenient. "I'm not making any decisions tonight," I said, and that was the truth. But the silence that followed held its own answer. Not a decision, a direction. One he felt, even if I hadn't spoken it. He rubbed his palms down his jeans and nodded, a stiff, uneasy motion. "I guess I'll sleep downstairs," he muttered. He stood, walked to the door, paused. For the first time that night, he didn't have a comeback. He didn't have an angle. Just a long breath, then a quiet retreat as he stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of everything settle into its final shape. The house felt different. The marriage felt different. I felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. I woke before the sun. The room still wrapped in that gray-blue quiet that makes everything feel suspended. For a moment, I didn't move. The events of the night pressed in slowly, not as a shock, but as a certainty. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Mark was awake, maybe pacing, maybe waiting, maybe hoping I'd come down first so he wouldn't have to start the conversation. I pushed the blankets aside and sat up, feet touching the carpet with a soft drag. I didn't feel angry. Anger burns fast. What lingered now was something steadier. When I walked downstairs, the kitchen light was on. Mark stood by the counter, hands braced on either side of a mug he hadn't touched. The coffee maker was on, but nothing poured. He must have forgotten to press the button. He glanced up when he heard me. Not defiant, not apologetic. Just tired in a way I recognized too well. "I didn't sleep," he said. "I know," I replied. He let out a long breath. "I shouldn't have yelled last night." A pause. "But you shouldn't have left like that either." There it was. The softening wrapped around a blade, half admission, half defense. The kind of apology that never lands because it never really arrives. I poured myself water instead of coffee. The faucet hummed quietly, the kind of morning sound that fills places where words fail. "I didn't feel respected," I said simply. "I didn't feel considered. Not by your family, not by you." He looked away. "I told them you'd cover it," he said. A confession, quiet and uncomfortable. "That's why they reacted the way they did. I told them." I set the glass down on the counter. "You made a promise with money that isn't yours." Another pause. "And with grief that isn't yours." He squeezed his eyes shut. "That's not what I meant. But that's what you did." A long silence stretched between us. Not hostile, not defensive. Just the kind where truth sits fully on the table for the first time. He ran a hand over his face. "I don't want this to break us," he said. I leaned against the counter, watching the way his shoulders sagged. "I don't want that either," I said. "But we can't go back to the way things were yesterday." He nodded slowly, like someone recognizing a terrain he never expected to cross. "What do you need from me?" he asked. It wasn't a plea, not manipulation, just a man finally asking the right question. "I need you to stand with me," I said. "Not beside them, not behind them, with me, when it matters." His eyes met mine, and for once they didn't slide away. The heater clicked on again. Outside, a few early risers scraped ice off windshields. A new day, a different one. He swallowed hard. "I can try." "Trying isn't enough," I replied, "but it's a start." He nodded again, slower, more grounded, more real. The moment didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the night. But something in the house shifted, a fragile movement toward something honest. I picked up my glass and walked toward the dining room, leaving him to absorb the weight of what he'd finally heard. Behind me, the coffee maker clicked as he remembered to press the button. The smallest sound, but it felt like a beginning. I sat at the dining table, fingers tracing the faint scratches in the wood. We'd hosted holidays here once. Birthdays. Small dinners with friends. Lately, it had become more of a hallway, a place we passed through instead of shared. The chair across from me stayed empty. Mark hovered in the kitchen, his footsteps slow, as if he wasn't sure he was welcome to sit. He lingered in the doorway, mug in hand, steam curling upward. "Can I join you?" he asked. The question surprised me, not because it was polite, but because it was unfamiliar from him. I nodded. He took the seat across from me, setting the mug down with a soft thud. His hands circled it like he needed the warmth. "Mom called me this morning," he said. He didn't look up. "She said you owe her an apology for ruining the dinner." A pulse of something flickered through me. Not shock, not even anger, just confirmation of exactly who she was and exactly what she thought I was for. "And you?" I asked. "What do you think?" He rubbed the side of his thumb against the mug. "I think she's wrong." The words landed quietly, like he was testing how they felt leaving his mouth. "I think I shouldn't have put you in that position," he added, "and I shouldn't have let them treat you the way they did." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I leaned back in the chair, letting the morning light spill across the table. "They didn't just treat me like I owed them money," I said. "They treated me like the money meant I owed them respect." He nodded, slow and heavy. "I know," he said. "I didn't see it last night, but I see it now." I studied him for a long moment, not to intimidate, to understand, to see if this was temporary guilt or a real shift. "You told them I'd cover the bill," I said. "Why?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I wanted to impress them," he admitted. "They always talk about how I don't provide enough. I thought—" He stopped, swallowing. "I thought if you paid, they'd stop saying things about me." The truth hit harder than I expected, not because it hurt, because it revealed just how deep his own wounds ran. "That wasn't mine to fix," I said gently, "and using my loss to protect your pride wasn't fair." He nodded again, this time slower, more honest. "I know," he whispered. The house felt still in a different way now, like something broken had been placed on a table between us, not repaired but acknowledged. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We set boundaries," I said, "with your family, with the money, with each other." His eyes lifted, meeting mine fully for the first time since midnight. "Okay." The heater hummed softly. A ray of winter light cut across the table, touching both our hands but not quite reaching the space in between. He took a breath. "If they can't accept it, then that's their problem," I said, "and their consequence." A quiet settled over the room, different from last night. Not distance, understanding, tentative but real. Mark looked down at his coffee again. "I'll talk to them," he said. "I'll handle it." The words were simple, but they felt heavy in the right way. He didn't reach for my hand. I didn't offer it. We weren't there yet, but for the first time in a long while, we were in the same room for the same reason, trying. And that was enough for now. I stood and moved to the sink, rinsing the glass from earlier. The running water filled the quiet with a steady hum. Mark stayed at the table, shoulders curved inward, like he was bracing himself for whatever came next. When I turned off the faucet, I felt his eyes on me, not watchful, waiting, uncertain. "You said you'd talk to them," I said. "Does that mean today?" He nodded. "I'll call them after breakfast." I wasn't expecting immediacy, but something in me eased at the certainty in his voice. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I'm not going to another dinner with them until this is addressed, clearly addressed. No jokes, no barbs, no assumptions. I understand. And if they try to turn this into me being dramatic or ungrateful, they won't, he said quickly. Then after a pause, if they do, I'll shut it down. Those words. They didn't fix the wound, but they stitched something at the edges. Slowly. He lifted his mug and took a long sip, the first one since he'd poured it. His hands weren't shaking now. Mine weren't either. "I should have protected you last night," he said, his voice caught in a way that surprised both of us. "And I didn't. I'm sorry, Ellen." This apology landed differently, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't softened. It wasn't defensive. It was real. I walked back to the table and sat down again, not across from him this time, but at the chair beside his, close enough to bridge the space without pretending nothing had happened. "We're not fixing everything today," I said, "but I'm listening." He nodded, relief flickering through his expression like a small light. "I know," he murmured, "and I won't make the same mistake again." We sat in a quiet that wasn't heavy. Wasn't tense, just still, like a room resetting after a long night. His phone buzzed on the table. Once, then again. Janice's name lit up the screen. He turned it face down. That small act told me more than any sentence he'd said so far. "Do you need space today?" he asked softly. I thought about it, about last night, about the months leading up to it, about the woman who walked out of the restaurant without looking back. "Not space," I said. "Just honesty. I can do that." We let the morning light move slowly across the table, warming the side of my hand. The day wasn't perfect. The marriage wasn't healed, but the fracture had stopped widening, and sometimes that's the beginning. The rest of the morning moved quietly. Mark stepped into the living room with his phone in hand, pacing once before stopping near the window. I could hear the faint murmur of his mother's voice when he answered, sharp even through the distance. He didn't put her on speaker. He didn't gesture for me to join. He just stood there, shoulders squared in a way I hadn't seen in years. "No," he said, voice firm. Then again, louder. "No, Mom, she doesn't owe you anything." The room stilled. Each word he said cut cleanly through the air. I didn't catch her responses, but I recognized the rhythm. Indignation, disbelief, the same tone she used last night at the restaurant. Mark didn't budge. "She paid for herself," he said. "She didn't agree to cover the entire table. I shouldn't have told you otherwise." A long pause. Then his tone sharpened. "Mom, it's not her job to fund our celebrations. And you don't get to talk about her inheritance like it's community property." Another pause. Janice must have snapped something back because Mark rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaling through his teeth. "No," he repeated. "I'm not asking her to apologize. You're the one who crossed a line." Silence followed. A long, thick silence. "It's not up for debate," he said finally, then softer. "And if you can't respect her, then we're taking a step back." He ended the call, set the phone down on the coffee table. He didn't turn right away. When he finally did, his expression wasn't proud or smug, just tired and clear. "She's not thrilled," he said. I assumed as much. But she heard me. I nodded. Not victory, not triumph, just acknowledgement of a boundary that had been needed for too long. He walked to the couch and sat down beside me, leaving a respectful amount of space. "I should have done that years ago," he admitted. "You did it today," I said, "and that matters." He let out a slow breath, the kind that releases something heavy. I don't want last night to be the thing that breaks us. "It doesn't have to be," I replied, "but it can't be ignored." He nodded. "I know." We sat there while the winter sun crept across the rug, brightening the room inch by inch, not talking, not arguing, just sitting in the same truth at the same time. After a while, he spoke again. "Ellen, what do you need from me going forward?" I thought about it, not for drama, not to make him wait, but because the question deserved more than a quick answer. "Respect," I said, "support, and no decisions made with my name attached unless I give it." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." "And your family?" I asked. "There'll be distance," he said, "at least for now." It wasn't punishment, it was protection. The house felt warmer somehow, not fixed, not healed, just no longer cracked in the places that had splintered last night. Mark finally leaned back against the couch, eyes closing for a moment. "I'm glad you came home," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. I looked around the room, the same walls, the same furniture, the same life, but something inside had shifted. "I came home for myself," I said, "not for them." When he opened his eyes, he didn't argue. He just nodded, accepting the truth without resistance. Outside, a few kids shouted while kicking ice on the sidewalk. The world moved on. And inside this house, so did we, carefully, honestly, in a direction that felt possible again. The afternoon settled in slowly, gray clouds drifting across the sky like they were taking their time. Mark had gone upstairs to shower, leaving the house in a soft quiet. A quiet that didn't feel strained for the first time in a long while. I moved to the kitchen, tidying small things, stacking mail, wiping a corner of the counter, tasks that didn't matter but helped settle my mind. When I opened the pantry to refill the sugar jar, something caught my eye. A small notebook tucked between cookbooks, my mother's, the one she used for recipes, grocery lists, and tiny reminders no one else would ever understand but me. I pulled it out gently, the cover soft from years of use. Her handwriting filled the first page, curved and steady, just like I remembered. I ran my thumb over the ink, not for nostalgia, for grounding. Her notes weren't about money, weren't about inheritance, weren't about any of the things his family had twisted into expectation. She wrote about simplicity, care, enoughness, things that had nothing to do with being used. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest for a moment, not crying, just breathing with it, letting the weight of her voice settle the noise of last night. Footsteps approached behind me. Mark paused in the doorway, hair still damp, expression softer than this morning. "That hers?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He stepped closer but didn't reach for it, didn't try to insert himself into the moment like he might have before. He simply nodded, letting it be mine. "She mattered to you more than anything," he said. A simple sentence, but true. I looked up at him, searching his face for the familiar defensiveness, but it wasn't there, just sincerity, and something that looked like regret softened into humility. "I didn't honor that last night," he said, "and I see that now." The words didn't unhurt the night, but they placed responsibility where it belonged. I set the notebook on the counter and turned fully toward him. "What happens with your family now?" I asked. "There'll be space," he said, "real space. And if we see them again, it will be on our terms. Our, not his, not theirs, ours." For a long moment, we stood there, the two of us framed by the kitchen light, neither reaching out, neither pulling away. "Ellen," he said finally, voice low, "I want to rebuild this." "I know," I replied. "I'm willing to try. But trying doesn't mean pretending." He nodded. "Then we'll do it honestly." The heater clicked on, warm air spreading across the tile floor. Outside, the sky brightened just a little, the kind of thin winter sunlight that feels like a promise rather than a certainty. I picked up my mother's notebook again, holding it lightly, then looked at Mark. "We'll go slow," I said, "together." His shoulders eased, not with relief, with understanding. We walked toward the living room, not touching, but moving in the same direction. A fragile alignment, a beginning that didn't erase anything, but acknowledged everything. The day felt different now, not healed, not whole, just honest. And honesty, after a night like that, was enough to keep going. Mark sat on the edge of the couch while I stood near the window, the afternoon light washing the room in a muted glow. Neither of us rushed into speaking. The stillness wasn't avoidance. It was the first shared breath we'd had since last night. I watched a pair of neighbors walk their dog across the snowy sidewalk. Simple, quiet. The kind of moment that makes you wonder how two people can live in the same house and still forget how to meet each other halfway. When I finally turned back, Mark was watching me, not cautiously, not defensively, just watching, like he was trying to read what came next without pushing it. "I talked to Rachel this morning," I said. He blinked. "Your friend?" I nodded. "She reminded me of something I said years ago, after my mom passed." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What was that?" "That I needed to build a life where people didn't confuse my kindness for convenience." He swallowed visibly. The sentence landed exactly where I knew it would. "And you think I did that?" he asked quietly. "I think you forgot the difference," I said. "Kindness is shared. Convenience is taken." He didn't argue. He didn't try to justify. He didn't run back to the safety of excuses. Instead, he nodded once. Slow. Heavy. "You're right," he said. "I took you for granted. I took your grief for granted. And that's on me." I walked toward the couch and sat down, not beside him this time, but at an angle where we faced each other fully, clear, unhidden. "I don't hate your family," I said, "but I won't let them speak to me the way they did. And I won't let them treat my mother's memory like a bill they feel entitled to cash." His eyes hardened, not at me, but at the memory. "I won't let it happen again. They'll either respect you or they won't see us." It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary. He took a long breath, then rested his hands loosely between his knees. "What do you need right now? Today?" I thought about it. Not about last night, not about the inheritance, about this moment, this room, this version of him sitting in front of me. "Time," I said, "and steadiness. Not promises that disappear next week." "I can give you that." His voice didn't shake, but something in it softened in a way I hadn't heard in years. I nodded, letting the quiet settle again. Outside, a car door shut. A dog barked. The world moved in small, ordinary ways. Inside, something shifted. Not dramatic, not sudden, not a sweeping change, but a turning. A quiet realignment. I stood and walked toward the hallway. He rose as well, not following too closely, just staying near enough to show presence without pressure. At the base of the stairs, I stopped. He did too. "We'll move slowly," I said, "and we won't pretend last night didn't happen." "No pretending," he agreed. "Not anymore." I started up the steps, leaving him at the bottom. Halfway up, I looked back. Not because I doubted, but because the moment asked for acknowledgement. He met my eyes, not expecting anything, not demanding, just waiting with the kind of openness I'd been missing for years. I gave a small nod, then continued upward, feeling the house exhale around us. Nothing was fixed, but something had begun, a quiet start. A needed one. I spent the next hour upstairs, moving slowly through small tasks, folding a sweater, opening curtains, letting lights settle into spaces that had felt dim for too long. Every now and then I heard Mark downstairs, opening drawers, closing cabinets, the soft shuffle of someone trying not to disturb anything. It didn't feel tense, just careful, like he was relearning the rules of a house he'd taken for granted. When I walked back down, he was sitting at the dining table with a notebook open in front of him. A pen rested between his fingers. He looked up as I approached, and for once he didn't hide the uncertainty in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the money." I stopped near the table, not sitting yet. "What about it?" He closed the notebook halfway. Not to conceal anything, just to show he wasn't clinging to whatever he'd written. "I don't want to treat it like something I get a say in," he said. "It's yours. It came from your life, your loss. I shouldn't have pushed." The words were quiet, but they sank in deeply. "I don't want our marriage tied to resentment," he continued. "So, if you want to keep it separate, if you want to handle it however you choose, I support that. Fully. It wasn't dramatized, it wasn't polished, it wasn't a speech, it was plain, honest, the kind of clarity I'd been waiting for. I took the chair across from him. You don't need to make a declaration about it, I said. I just need you to respect it, and not treat it like a resource for your family to tap into. He nodded, tightening his grip on the pen. I understand. A pause passed between us. This one didn't hurt. What did your mom say at the end of the call? I asked. He let out a small breath. She said I was choosing you over her. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? That it wasn't a choice, he replied. She crossed a boundary. I'm correcting it. For the first time since last night, something warm flickered in my chest. Not forgiveness, not relief, but recognition of the man I once believed he could be. Thank you, I said. He nodded, lowering his gaze for a moment as if absorbing the weight of that simple sentence. Do you want some time alone? He asked gently. Or do you want company? The question wasn't loaded. It wasn't trying to score points. It was genuine. I want quiet, I said, but you don't have to leave the room. He stayed exactly where he was, not inching closer, not pulling away. Just present, the kind of presence that didn't demand anything, didn't cost anything, didn't take anything. I rested my arms on the table. He went back to his notebook, not writing, just holding the pen as if he were thinking with it. The silence that settled between us felt like the first real peace in days. Outside, a thin beam of sunlight slipped across the floor, a fragile reminder that the day, despite everything, was still moving forward. We were too. I walked into the living room, letting my fingers trail along the back of the sofa. The fabric felt familiar beneath my hand, the kind of familiarity you stop noticing until something in your life demands you pay attention again. Mark stayed at the table, pen still resting between his fingers, as if he was afraid that moving too fast might undo whatever fragile progress we'd made. For once, I didn't mind the stillness between us. It wasn't avoidance, it was space being respected. I sat near the window, pulling my knees up slightly as I looked outside. A few neighbors were taking down the last of their New Year decorations. Deflated balloons, string lights drooping from porch rails, a faded banner slipping in the cold wind. Life was cleaning itself up from the night before. I felt the metaphor, subtle and imperfect, but there. Footsteps approached behind me. Mark stood a few feet away, uncertain, waiting for some quiet invitation. You can sit, I said. No warmth. No edge, just permission. He lowered himself onto the opposite end of the sofa, not close enough to crowd me, not far enough to retreat, just there. And for now, that was exactly where he needed to be. I've been thinking about something, he said. His voice carried a soft unease, like the words were heavy before they even left him. I turned slightly. He swallowed once. Then, I don't want my family to pull us apart, but I also don't want to pretend they're harmless. A surprisingly honest admission, one I hadn't expected. They're not harmless, I said, and last night proved that. He nodded slowly. I know, and I let them cross a line. I didn't defend you. I didn't even pause to think about how it would feel for you. I just wanted them off my back. His voice didn't shake, but the guilt settled into the room like a shadow finally speaking its name. You can't keep using me as a shield, I said softly. You can't offer pieces of my life just because they make yours easier. I won't, he said. The firmness surprised even him, but I can't fix what already happened. I can only change what comes next. I leaned my head against the cushion, letting the truth of that settle. It wasn't an eraser. It wasn't redemption. But it was a start. I know you're trying, I said, and I'm giving you that. His shoulders loosened, the first visible release since last night. A small silence stretched between us. Not heavy, not brittle. Just a pause, a space to breathe. Then he said something I didn't expect. I was scared you wouldn't come home. I looked at him, steady. I came home for myself, not for them, not for you. He nodded, accepting it. There was no argument left in him, just reflection. Maybe even understanding. Outside, the wind shifted and rattled the last loose string of lights on a neighbor's porch. Inside, the air felt quieter, thicker with truth but thinner with tension. Mark slid his hands together, rubbing his palms slowly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Ask. What do you need from me tonight? Not tomorrow, not next week, not perfect promises or grand gestures, just tonight." I thought for a long moment, then answered plainly, "Consistency." He nodded, almost grateful for the clarity. "I can do that," he said softly. "I will do that." He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for my hand. He just stayed there, steady, aware, present in a way last night had never allowed. And for the first time since I walked out of that restaurant, I felt the smallest shift towards safety, quiet but real. The rest of the day unfolded in slow, deliberate movements, not tense, not rushed. Just two people trying to navigate the space between hurt and possibility. As evening settled, I moved to the kitchen to start a simple dinner. Nothing elaborate, just something warm. The soft clatter of dishes filled the room. Mark hovered in the doorway for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching like he wasn't sure whether he should offer help or stay out of the way. "You can set the table," I said. He nodded once, relieved to have a clear role. We worked quietly. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a folded napkin at each seat. Nothing dramatic, but the balance felt different than last night. Less expectation, more awareness. When we sat down, he lifted his fork, then paused. "I talked to Carla," he said. The name sank heavily between us. And Walter, separately. My eyes met his. "And?" "They both tried to make excuses," he said. "And I didn't let them." A quiet firmness threaded through his voice, one I hadn't heard in a long time. "They said you overreacted," he continued. "I told them you didn't. I told them I created the expectation, and that if they want to be part of our lives, they need to treat you with respect." The words didn't repair anything, but they stitched the edges of something torn. Slowly, carefully, correctly. "And your mother?" I asked. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "That's going to take more time," he admitted. "But she knows the boundary now. Whether she accepts it or not is up to her." I nodded. It wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. We ate in small bites, the quiet shifting from strained to breathable. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and looked at me. "You know," he said, "when you walked out last night, I realized something." I kept my expression neutral. "What did you realize?" "That I've been leaning on you more than I should," he said. "The money made it easy to avoid things I should have handled myself, and I let my family believe that what you had was something they had access to." He exhaled slowly. "I'm ashamed of that." The honesty settled deep, not loud, not performative, just true. "You can't undo last night," I said, "but you can change what comes after." "I want to," he said. "I really do." After dinner, I rinsed the plates while he dried them. The smallness of the task felt grounding. 2 people doing something ordinary after a night that had been anything but. When we finished, I leaned back against the counter. Mark stood a few feet away, waiting for something in my posture, my tone, my face. "Tonight will be quiet," I said. "No long conversations, no digging into everything at once. Just quiet." He nodded. "I can give you that." I turned off the kitchen light. The room dimmed into a softer shade of evening, shadows settling into corners. As I walked toward the stairs, he stayed behind, giving me space without pulling away. At the first step, I paused and looked back. He met my eyes, steady, unsure, but present in a way that mattered. I didn't smile. I didn't reassure him. I didn't offer warmth I didn't have, but I gave a small nod. a quiet acknowledgement that despite everything, there was still a path forward. Narrow, slow, conditional, but real. Then I climbed the stairs, one step, then another, leaving behind a house that, for the first time in months, felt like it might eventually become a home again. The bedroom was dim when I entered, the soft glow from the hallway slipping across the floor like a thin ribbon of light. I closed the door part way, not fully, just enough to claim my space without shutting the house out. I moved to the dresser and set my mother's notebook on top, smoothing the worn cover with my palm. A familiar steadiness settled into me, not comfort, just truth. Something solid to lean against after a night that had cracked so much. Downstairs, the faint murmur of a TV drifted upward, Mark keeping himself occupied, keeping his distance, not sulking, not punishing, just giving the quiet room to breathe. I changed into softer clothes and sat on the edge of the bed, letting my thoughts settle in slow, manageable currents. Last night replayed itself not as a storm anymore, but as a sequence of moments, each one pointing to the same truth I had ignored for too long. I heard the creak of the stairs, slow steps, hesitant, a quiet pause outside the bedroom door, then a soft knock, just one. Yes? Mark opened the door a few inches, enough for me to see him but not enough for him to step inside without permission. He held a folded blanket in his hands. "I'm heading to the couch," he said. "I just wanted to say good night." No pleading, no angle, just a small offering of gentleness at the end of a long, fractured day. "Good night," I said. He nodded and turned to go, then stopped. He looked back with an expression I hadn't seen since before my mother got sick. Open, unsure, wanting to hold something carefully for once instead of taking it. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, slowly, the right way. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence can be an agreement when it's honest. He left the blanket at the foot of the stairs and walked down, his steps fading into the living room. A few minutes later, the house settled again, the kind of quiet that doesn't hurt, doesn't pressure, doesn't demand. I lay back on the bed, the ceiling a pale blur in the dark. My mother's notebook rested only a few inches away, its presence grounding the air around me. I closed my eyes. The memory of last night didn't vanish, but it loosened, a knot beginning to unwind. Some wounds take time to close. Some truths take time to reshape. Some marriages rebuild one quiet evening at a time, and tonight that was enough. I woke to a faint blue light leaking through the curtains, the kind of early morning glow that softens everything it touches. For a long moment, I stayed still, listening to the quiet of the house, a quiet that no longer felt like a wall, just a space waiting to be filled, slowly, carefully. I slipped out of bed and wrapped a sweater around my shoulders before heading downstairs. Mark was asleep on the couch, one arm tucked under his head, the blanket loosely draped over him. He looked smaller like that. Not weak, just human. A man who'd finally stopped bracing himself long enough to rest. I didn't wake him. I moved into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee, the soft drip breaking the morning silence bit by bit. When the mug filled, I took it to the dining table and sat alone with the steam rising in gentle curls. A few minutes passed before I heard movement. Mark stirred. Shifting under the blanket, then sat up slowly. When he noticed me at the table, he hesitated in the doorway, still careful, still watching for signals I hadn't yet given. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning." He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward the kitchen. "Can I make you breakfast?" It wasn't a peace offering, not a performance, just an attempt. Small, human, and unforced. "Just sit," I said. "We'll talk in a minute." He nodded and took the chair across from me, mirroring the same distance and presence as yesterday. His eyes were tired but clear, more grounded than I'd seen in a long time. After a moment, he spoke. "I thought a lot about what you said last night." I waited, not urging, not rescuing him from the weight of the words he needed to face. I leaned on you because I thought it was easier, he said. I let my family lean on you because I didn't want to confront them myself, and that wasn't fair to you, or to us. I traced the rim of my mug with my thumb. You're seeing it now. That matters. He nodded, eyes dropping to the table. I don't want to be that man again. You don't have to be, I said, but it takes more than apologies. It takes action. I know, he whispered, and I'm ready to do the work. The light through the window shifted, brightening the corner of the table, a soft, quiet illumination. Not dramatic, but steady. Mark, I said gently, we can rebuild, but it has to be slow, earned, and honest. He met my eyes. No defensiveness, no anger, just a quiet kind of acceptance that comes when someone finally sees the truth without flinching. I won't rush you, he said, and I won't expect anything from you that you don't offer freely. I exhaled, letting the words land. They didn't erase last night, but they gave it context, a shape, a path forward. You should talk to your therapist again, I said softly, about boundaries and about why you needed your family's approval so much that you put me in their hands. He nodded. Yeah, I will. A long pause settled between us. Then, Ellen, thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't respond, not because I didn't feel anything, but because some words don't need answers. They just need space to breathe. I stood and refilled my mug. Behind me, Mark stayed seated, hands resting quietly in his lap. We weren't fixed. We weren't healed, but something in the house felt more aligned than it had in months. A beginning. Again. But this time, with intention. By late morning, the house felt warmer. Not from the heater, but from something quieter, a kind of calm that had finally found places to settle. I stepped into the living room with a fresh cup of coffee and found Mark folding the blanket he'd used on the couch, not hurried, not performing, just tidying the space he'd occupied. He looked up when I entered. Do you want to go for a walk? He asked. His voice was gentle, an invitation, not an expectation. Maybe later, I said. For now, let's just stay here. I sat on the armchair near the window. He lowered himself onto the couch again, keeping a respectful distance, letting the quiet build naturally between us instead of rushing to fill it. After a moment, he spoke. I've been thinking about what boundaries look like, not just with my family, but with us. I nodded for him to continue. I know I let them influence how I treated you, he said. I know I didn't stand up for you, and I don't want that to ever happen again. You'll need to practice it, I said, not just say it. He nodded. I understand. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, and the low rumble of a car rolling over frost drifted through the window. The morning had texture again, sounds and light and movement that weren't blurred by tension. I called my brother, too, Mark said. He understands what happened. He said he's sorry for how the night went. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That was unexpected. He was surprised by Mom's behavior, Mark admitted, and by mine. He didn't hide the shame in that. He didn't mask it with excuses. I let the silence stretch before I spoke. Mark, resentment doesn't come from one night. It comes from patterns, and last night exposed the pattern. He swallowed, eyes dropping to his hands. I know. And it takes time to undo one. I'm ready for that, he said softly, even if it's slow. The sunlight brightened the room a little more, pushing back the shadowed corners. A quiet can shift an entire house when both people want to meet in the same place. Can I ask you something? I said. He looked up immediately. Anything. Why didn't you defend me last night? Not once. His face tightened. Not in defensiveness, but in discomfort, the way truth sometimes forces a person to sit still with themselves. Because I was embarrassed, he said. Not embarrassed of you, embarrassed that I couldn't afford that dinner on my own. I didn't respond. I let him continue. And when Mom made that joke and Carla followed her lead, I just froze. I didn't know how to stop it without looking like the weak link again. Weak link. The phrase explained more than he realized. So you let me be the one they leaned on, I said, because it made things easier for you. He nodded slowly. I'm not proud of it. You shouldn't be, I replied, but I'm glad you're naming it. Another long quiet filled the room, not harsh, not bitter, just honest. I'll do better, he said. I promise you that. Promises aren't enough, I said, but consistency is. He nodded again, accepting the correction without flinching. A soft gust of wind brushed against the window, rattling a loose strip of frost. I sipped my coffee, the warmth settling in. We'll walk later, I said. When the sun's a little higher. Okay. He didn't smile. I didn't either. But something softened between us. A tiny shift toward rebuilding, not out of nostalgia, but out of understanding. Sometimes healing begins in these small, quiet rooms. Sometimes marriages do too. In the early afternoon, the sun pushed through the thinning clouds, casting a pale gold across the living room rug. I set my empty mug on the side table and stood, stretching the stiffness from my shoulders. Mark watched me quietly, waiting, not for instructions, not for reassurance, but simply waiting with a patience he hadn't shown in years. Let's walk, I said. He nodded and grabbed his coat, meeting me at the door without a single question. Outside, the air was cool and fresh, the kind that wakes you up from the inside out. Ice cracked softly under our steps as we moved down the sidewalk, slow, steady, not in sync, but not out of rhythm either. We passed the houses lined with melting frost, remnants of last night glittering on lawns and porches. The neighborhood felt softer than yesterday. Maybe the world hadn't changed. Maybe I had. Halfway down the block, Mark spoke without looking at me. I know I can't undo what happened at the restaurant. You can't, I said, but you can show me it won't happen again. He nodded, eyes on the ground. I will, not because you're asking, but because I should have long before this. We walked a few more steps. A soft wind lifted the ends of my hair. A kid on a bike skidded past us, laughing, the sound bright against the quiet street. When we reached the corner, Mark stopped. I want to earn back your trust, he said, and I'm not expecting forgiveness today, or tomorrow, or any specific day. I looked at him. Really looked. The defensiveness was gone. The sharp edges of pride had softened. What remained was a man standing in the truth of what he'd done. Finally, without flinching. We'll rebuild slowly, I said, with new boundaries, and clarity, and honesty. He nodded again, swallowing tightly. I'm with you, wherever that leads. The wind eased, the sky brightened, and for a moment everything around us felt still. We turned back toward the house, walking in a quiet that didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt chosen, intentional. Two people moving through the aftermath of a painful night, but moving. Not stuck, not circling the hurt, not pretending it didn't exist, just moving, together. Carefully. When we reached the front door, I paused. The house looked the same, but something in the air around it didn't. Maybe it was hope, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles into the corners after truth has finally been spoken. I rested my hand on the railing. Mark stood a step behind me, waiting, not pressing forward. I didn't turn fully toward him. I just said softly, "We'll take today as it comes." "Okay," he replied. The door creaked open under my hand. I stepped inside. He followed. A careful distance, not out of fear, but out of respect. The house welcomed us with a warm hush, and for the first time since last night, the quiet didn't ache. It breathed. The house felt softer when we stepped back inside, as if the cold air from outside had cleared something stagnant. I hung my coat on the hook by the door. Mark did the same, leaving a small space between ours, a quiet, respectful distance. I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, letting the late-day light settle across my hands. The house hummed with ordinary sounds, the heater cycling on, a neighbor's car door closing, the faint tick of the kitchen clock. Nothing dramatic, just real. Mark stood in the doorway, uncertain for a moment, then slowly walked over and sat at the other end of the couch. Not close, but deliberately present. We didn't speak right away. The silence felt different now. Not avoidance, not tension, but room. Room to breathe, room to think, room to be honest without rushing. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for walking with me." I nodded. It helped. He looked down at his hands. "They don't get to talk about your mother again. Not like that. Not ever." The clarity in his voice didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a boundary he had etched into himself. I let the words settle, not trusting them blindly, but recognizing the weight they carried. "I don't need perfection from you," I said softly. "I just need consistency and respect every time, even when it's uncomfortable." "You have that," he said. "Going forward, you have that." A stretch of silence followed, warm and full, like the quiet after a storm finally passes and the air tastes clean again. I leaned back into the cushion, letting my shoulders ease. "I'm not forgetting what happened," I said, "and I'm not pretending it didn't hurt." "I don't want you to pretend," he replied. "I want us to rebuild with the truth, not around it." The honesty in his voice wasn't sharp this time. It was steady, grounded. A man stepping out from the shadow of his own pride. Outside, the sky deepened into early evening, a soft gradient of blue and gold fading together. The day had been long, emotionally, quietly, painfully long, but it had shape now, direction, possibility. Mark exhaled, the sound low and tired but clearer than anything he'd said last night. "I'm with you," he said, "wherever this goes, slow, steady, and honest." I didn't answer with words. Some moments don't need them. Instead, I let the room grow still again, the kind of stillness that doesn't bruise, the kind that makes space. Then I stood and walked toward the hallway light, flipping it on with a soft click. It pooled a warm glow across the floor. Behind me, Mark rose from the couch, stopping a respectful distance away, close enough to show presence, far enough to show he understood the new terms of our life. I turned slightly toward him. Not an embrace, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. A beginning. One small, quiet step at a time. The night settled around the house. Gentle, steady, open. And in that hush, I felt something I hadn't felt since before everything cracked. My own kind of peace. If any part of this felt familiar, you're welcome to comment.